Bien, il est 10h02. Nous allons pouvoir commencer cette 5e édition. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Bienvenue pour cette 5e édition donc, du colloque international Game Evolution. Je suis Antoine Chollet, l'un des co-organisateurs de cet événement avec mon
On t'entend
collègue.
en double, Antoine. On t'entend en double.
Vous m'entendez en double? C'est plutôt pas mal. Vous m'entendez en double. Alors, si... est-ce que là, c'est mieux? Est-ce que vous m'entendez en une seule fois? Ou pas du tout?
Ah, c'est bon.
Parce que tu étais peut-être connecté sur Twitch, Philippe.
Non.
Non? Ah, autant pour moi. Bien, eh bien, écoutez, bonjour à toutes et à tous encore une fois. Et donc, c'est parti pour cette 5e édition du colloque Game Evolution. Avec mon collègue donc Philippe Lépinard, nous avons co-organisé cette édition. Et sans plus tarder, eh bien, je vais passer la parole à Emmanuel Dubocage pour dire quelques mots en ouverture eh bien, de cette édition. Et nous reprendrons la parole juste après. Emmanuel, c'est à toi.
Merci Antoine. Bienvenue à tous au 5e colloque international Game Evolution organisé par Philippe Lépinard et Antoine Chollet. Donc, j'ai le plaisir d'introduire celui-ci en tant que directrice de l'IRG. Notre laboratoire accueille une équipe travaillant sur les recherches valorisant la réflexivité de l'enseignement des sciences de gestion et des innovations pédagogiques. Et le colloque Game Evolution, en partenariat avec MRM, Montpellier Research Management, est un événement important dans le cadre de ces travaux. Alors, la 5e édition du colloque aujourd'hui rassemble près d'une 50aine d'intervenants venant de France, mais aussi de Belgique, de Suisse, du Canada, des Pays-Bas, du Royaume-Uni et de Tunisie. Le colloque débutera par 2 conférences plénières. Donc, a special welcome to Sarah Lefebvre et Natalia Wojtowicz. Sarah est rédactrice en chef de la revue en ligne Ludogogy et Natalia est l'auteur du livre Wargaming Experiences. Plus d'une quinzaine de communications cette année seront présentées autour de 5 sessions réparties sur 2 journées. Donc, jeux de rôle, jeux d'évasion, ludopédagogie en distanciel, apport réflexif sur la ludopédagogie et collaboration et dispositifs ludopédagogiques. Porté par le charisme de ses organisateurs, le succès du colloque de l'année dernière porte ses fruits puisque cette année, le nombre de présentations, le nombre de participants a doublé. En tant que directrice recherche de l'IAE Gustave Eiffel, je suis particulièrement heureuse de voir un papier présentant le projet collectif EduTeam Wargames par 2 étudiants de l'IAE, donc Manon Lombard et Mathieu Denoal. Donc bravo à Manon, bravo à Mathieu. Donc ce papier présente le projet collectif, comme je lui disais, des M1 EduTeam Wargames. Et donc ceci illustre parfaitement les liens féconds entre formation et recherche que nous souhaitons développer à l'IAE Gustave Eiffel. Donc, je laisse désormais la parole à Philippe et Antoine et vous souhaite un excellent colloque et j'espère vous retrouver de visu pour de vrai pour la 5e édition en présentiel. Bon colloque à vous tous. Merci.
Merci beaucoup Emmanuel pour ta présence qui nous fait très plaisir. Antoine?
Oui, alors, je vais passer à la suite. Est-ce que vous m'entendez toujours en double ou pas là? Parce que je fais des tests.
Non, c'est parfait.
Ah, c'est parfait. On ne savait pas. Bien, eh bien écoutez, pour commencer cette édition, alors déjà quelques mots en anglais, puisque nous avons eh bien, quelques personnes internationales. So I switch in English for a few seconds to tell to you the event was created 5 years ago in 2017. The objective when I created this event was to bring people together around a scientific event on the game. For 5 years, the event has evolved with an increase in the number of participants or the passage over 2 days. I will switch on French now because I'm not very very fluent in English and I prefer to speak in French for a lot of people here. So sorry for English people. Je vais donc dire quelques mots maintenant en français. C'était histoire de, eh bien, de dire quelques mots en anglais. C'était de l'improvisation totale. Je pense que Philippe, tu dois rigoler de mon accent. Ça va être magnifique, non? Alors, juste pour vous dire que cette édition, contrairement à l'édition précédente, elle est certes en ligne, mais elle est aussi diffusée en live sur la chaîne Twitch que je possède. Donc, ça veut dire qu'on peut être connecté et il faudra nous dire si vous ne souhaitez pas donc être diffusé en Twitch. Mais je pense que Philippe, tu vas en parler et de suite, je vais te laisser quelques mots de présentation. Donc, c'est à toi, Philippe. Je te passe la parole.
Okay, thank you very much, Antoine. So the entire conference is recorded for archival and reporting purposes. In parallel, for those who would have problem with Zoom, Antoine is streaming on his Twitch channel. If you don't wish to do so, feel free to contact Antoine. We ask you to respect your slots so that all the speakers can benefit from the same amount of time. I will be the military timekeeper. Finally, I would like to thank you, the 22 reviewers, for their indispensable involvement in this conference. Without further ado, we are very pleased to welcome Sarah and Natalia to start the conference. We will first listen to Sarah, who runs the website and the online magazine Ludogogy. Then we will listen to Natalia, who is the author of the book on Wargames. Thank you, Sarah and Natalia, for agreeing to come and talk about your amazing project. We wish you all an excellent conference. Sarah, it's up to you.
Okay, I stop my scratching.
Sarah is here. No, Sarah is not here.
Sarah was here.
Yes, she was here. Maybe we could switch by Natalia. Natalia, are you ready to switch with Sarah?
Yes, good morning.
Thank you very much.
I started my video, but indeed I don't see it yet. But I'm happy to start the conference. I believe Sarah might be on another time zone, so she will probably pop in after that start, which is great. I don't know if you can see me at the moment.
Natalia, we can see you. Do you have a PowerPoint or slide for your presentation? Or not?
No,
Okay.
thank you. I will just speak, so...
It's perfect. No problem. No problem.
Yes, that will save us maybe also some technical issues that always come by. But before I start, I would like to shortly introduce myself. I understood, of course, a bit what you have been speaking about. However, I'm not fluent in French. So excuse my English indeed in this all French conference. My name is Natalia Wojtowicz. I am a lecturer at The Hague University of Applied Sciences, and I specialize in wargaming. For the first 5 years, I have been designing wargames for NATO, mostly for civil-military cooperation. And this is where I recognized a lot of both common problems and uncommon solutions to these designs, because they escaped normal traditional wargaming, but they were not really in the gaming mode. So I really had to find compromise on many aspects. And as a result, I published Wargaming Experiences. It is a book that takes you through my journey from the beginning of recognizing the theory, through main challenges, and up to the prototypes and case studies of implementation of wargames. And after that, I moved to the Hague University, where I now lead the Wargaming project. And we have 3 different main questions that we pose. And one is about military application of wargaming. One is about industrial safety. So maybe that is also an interest to many of you. And as well, public safety. So these are 3 modules that we work on. And today I wanted to speak about evolution in wargaming, and I believe we could merge that a lot with evolution of gaming, because we see a lot of development, and I was always wondering whether it is possible to collect the conclusions about it. But I will have to settle on the key questions. We do have the time limits, and obviously also your patience has limits. And the first question that I would like to pose, and this is the part where I would open it to the chat. Please comment when I am asking those key questions. So I started to think about the question, who are wargamers? Or who is a wargamer? And obviously an easy way out of this question, who is a wargamer, is a person that plays games. But we all know that this is generally true, but doesn't say much. And I also wanted to come back to our role. I believe many of you are researchers, designers, or facilitators of professional games. So the question is, how can you understand wargamers and what you can do as a designer because of that understanding? So the first step that I took already in my experience with NATO was to map the general population that would play the war games. And I came to quite a stark conclusion that there is not a high tolerance for complex games. So there was about 80% of our participants that would be able to play role-playing games or miniature games, decision-making case studies, but there was much lower number, around 15%, that enjoyed board games or structured games, or if you want to, closed rules system games. And then again, the lowest percentage, 5%, were fan of advanced complex games, those that you could play for days and that have books instead of the rule packages. So I ended up with 80% of the population being happy to play role-playing games, 15% that could go into board games, and 5% that enjoyed advanced complex war games, closer to Euro games than to a learning lecture. And then I thought about it, because obviously this is a very limited cross-section of the population. So I bet that when you prepare your games, you can also look at the participants of your games in that manner. You can see what they are willing to play, what they want to play, how they want to play. And this gives you, as a designer, an useful answer to the question, who are wargamers, or gamers in case of other topics. And then I also noticed it is not a solid mess. So you can see that the population is changing as well, because gaming becomes even more popular, and that has been going on for years. And that means we have a changing profile. And what I have noticed myself, both on the academic and professional side, as well as a gamer, is that the expectations are higher than previously. That means, and that is a very positive, of course, outcome, but that means that simple games will not be noticed anymore. People are looking for the eye catchers, for something unique. And I see a question which I'm very happy with. Higher in which way? Why are the expectations higher, or in which manner do I mean that? If you look on the commercial side, on the winners of the Game of the Year award for the last 20 years, you not only see that the trend in graphics are obviously changing, but also games that used to be considered very solid are now mediocre. So the expectations of quality, uniqueness, originality are certainly higher. And you also can notice the proliferation of components. And this is also quite regional in my view. And I also notice a comment that complexity of rules diminishes. And that might also be an interesting trend, that there are more of simple games coming out than those of the complex rule set. And I would agree with that. And I would also say that this comes back to the profile of your audience. So in my case, if 80% of the audience is more inclined to play simple games, I do have very strong constraint as a designer. And then the question also becomes, when can you afford complexity? Because I did that as well in the past, to prepare a board game that would extend over 2-3 hours with additional debriefing, explaining its results. You could go up to 4. And then that was the question, how many people would realistically benefit from this board game? We came back with very low numbers. So this was, at least for professional wargaming, the question at the time, how can you balance the needs of the audience with the accuracy of your designs? So you are, Pierre, proposing very good questions to who are wargamers and how to recognize the changes within the community itself. Because the second part that comes with raised expectations is more competition. So we do see games that come out on the same topic consecutively. That means we do not have one designer that works on cyber. We do not have one designer that works on tank warfare. We do not have one designer that works on managerial skills. We do have plenty, and they all bring most of the time different formats for the same topic. So there is a much better choice in terms of what would fit the best in the preferred outcomes. And that also brings me to the point of what is happening not only with wargamers, but as well with the designers. And here you would think that the longer the discipline is evolving, the more established it is, the higher professionalization of wargaming. But actually I see an opposite trend. So we do not have either baseline standards or education that brings you to the position of designer. It is rather your practice. And in many cases, I believe most of you have been gamers before you have become designers. because that gives you instinctive knowledge of the concepts and mechanics in games. And obviously this creates a very broad world which brings new formats, but it is also almost impossible to establish the guild format for wargaming, because literally everybody can design. And that is, as I said, positive, but it can also have downside in a matter of there is no quality control when you look at professional games. Sometimes they are unique and very useful, sometimes they are not. And we do have some very famous failures that we need to process as a discipline to avoid repeating the same mistakes. But when I thought about key questions, I also came back to the evolution. So I was thinking, what is evolving in wargaming or gaming in general? First of all, the formats. In my view, we used to have very set categories for games and war games, starting either with complexity levels or even further, a given topic had a default format. So for wargamers, tactical, operational, strategic games, they had different topics, but they looked and worked the same. So what you can notice currently is that formats are evolving because we experiment more. And there is more, I guess, what you could call hybrids, meaning there can be a war game that includes diplomacy or includes Euro mechanisms, or has other elements that previously did not coexist in one game. And that also brings me to mechanics, because you can divide them into either random or deterministic, or again, simple and complex, but they do evolve towards more and more mechanics that can be used. I have an interesting question from Damien, and that is, there is a high development of war games at the moment, and there is higher need for it. So would it be better to find a specific persona to focus on, or is it better to have a wider focus? And I presume that this question is about designing war games, where you could think about if you are going into design. I think it's first of all good to combine two things. One is think what interests you, because this is where you will be able to show the most about the topic that you know about a lot. And second, think what is of interest to the audience. And if you have a crossover, then this will be a successful game, because again, you are able to present it and people are interested to play it. And that also brings me to mechanics that have to be sometimes unique to the topic. And I have seen that you can, of course, create basic mechanic that comes back with different themes, but the most successful games have been tailored to the topic, and they reflect what is in the game with the way you are making decisions, not only decisions to make. And that brings me further to the topics and perspective that is evolving. So if you remember, and I see that there is a question about Philippe Sabin's book, that is one of the first publications that came out speaking about theory and application of wargaming. one of the games he proposed was Take That Hill. So that topic is quite straightforward. It is about tactics of achieving a goal in front of you, achieving a mission. Whether what we see now as a topic is often uprisings, it's often campaigns with multiple actors in it. We see counterinsurgency, meaning not only combat, but also political elements. So there is evolution of topics from those that, in my view, were more precise in their construct than those that are more open and they ask for more elements. And I do see a question as well about the evolution of different programs that are available to wargaming, either fans or designers. And indeed, Frederic Serval recently started a book club, which for me is a very high note for evolution, because when I started designing wargames, there were 3 books you could read. So it would be very difficult to create a format around it. But now, every year there is a couple of books published and you can start to discuss them, which is fantastic, because I do see there is a need to look not only at the task in front of you to design the game, but also discuss the discipline itself. And that also means both designers and players are evolving, precisely because we have more of them, but also because their expectations and needs are more prevalent. And that means more communities is built for gaming and more collaborations is started. For communities, I also recognize your conference as a high point where professionals can speak about their challenges. And certainly I see that when I attend connections for wargaming that spins now around the globe, and other forms of game design discussions. And it is a very rapid development, because you can see YouTube channels, you can see seminars that are now available to the public. And again, if I come back to my starting point as a designer, there was simply no resources. So you had to dig it up and experiment with your formats. Whereas now it is possible to quickly receive response from the community. And just yesterday, I posted on Twitter a question about wargaming of cyber capabilities. And within one day, there is 10 answers. So I do see wargaming community as one of the most collaborative ones. And that also brings me to my last key question. So we have different profiles of players. We have public that is asking for more war games. We have growing expectations, and we have evolution in format and mechanics, topics and perspective, designers and players, and communities. So the logical next question for me was, what is next? And that thought came to me both when I prepared for this conference and when I was rereading Philippe Sabin for the book club. If you read any of the wargaming books, it always starts with the definitions and the history. And the reason is wargaming has been discounted. And it has not been treated as a scientific or professional discipline. It has been treated as a hobby and extra function of professionals. But that causes, of course, that, as I said, each author that wants to either publish or designer that wants to speak about their experience has to explain themselves. And it sounds like we are the only profession that accepts this truth, that we should be at the beginning justifying that we are. So if we ask ourselves, who are wargamers? The answer should be, of course, people that play or design war games, but it should not have to be explained every time with the history coming back to Kriegspiel. And the reason why I say that is not because history is somehow less worthy. I think it is very worthy and it is necessary, but we have to be able to take a step forward. So from the beginning, yes, we have established wargaming history, and here I can certainly propose numerous authors that deal with that. But when we speak about evolution, when we speak about developments, the starting point of our discussion should not be why wargaming is a topic and how it was developed over the last, we normally come back 200 years, but you could come back thousands of years. It should be the question of what can be done next. So the future focus of our current work is very important. And I certainly will take that approach with my next book, where I will not start again with explaining why wargaming works. I will start with, this is a particular case for which wargaming was the best solution. And I believe as a profession, we have to make that point of distinction, and that will also contribute to professionalization, where we do not accept undermining the discipline itself anymore. Because if you would go to a mechanic, you would not ask, why is the car working at all? You would ask, what is their recommendation to make it work better? And this is how I would like to see the discipline evolve. And I believe, if I may conclude my presentation, that evolution as a term gives the best conclusion. I don't know if you had the chance to ever look at the original manuscript of Darwin. He was discredited, persecuted, and he wrote extensively about objections to his work from all of the academic centers in his time. And the reason was he tried to propose a theory that was well, explaining very well the reality, but it stood in opposition to those that were taught and developed elsewhere. And I do believe that we have to take from his spirit and his achievement the conclusion to not back down when you know that you are right as a designer, as a facilitator, as a player of war games. And the last point that I would like to make is all of the wargaming success comes from building a coalition. And I would like to very much invite you to reach out to me, to the Safety and Security program, when you see that there is a war game that could benefit from us working together. Because this is how, in my experience, wargaming has moved. When it has the space and people willing to make it more interesting, more challenging, more applicable. So this is what I would like to conclude with. Continue building the coalition and develop the sense of progress that comes from changing the starting point towards the highest professional application. thank you very much for having me. And of course, I am open to questions.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Your book is awesome. I will have to buy a second copy because the first one is so worn out. I have two questions, Natalia. First of all, I would like to tell us about your very interesting wargame evaluation matrix, which is in your book. I show to you on page 63, this one. Do you have any idea on how to develop it? Maybe perhaps by integrating learning dimensions? And my second question is, I would like to know what you think of the uses of wargame in non-military educational contexts. More specifically, in your own research, have you identified possible uses for other fields or disciplines?
Thank you. I will write down the second question so I don't forget it when I answer the first one. Thank you very much for reading my book and seeing so much worth in it. Indeed, it might sound very basic, but when I wrote it, I thought this is the book I would like to have when I started designing, because it would save me so much of cognitive dissonance, because within wargaming you not only have choices, but you really have opposite views on the same matters. And this is where I saw, okay, you need to know these dilemmas to proceed, and often take the third road, choose your own interpretation to make the best progress. And indeed, within the book and within my own designs, I have used a matrix, a table that gives you the basic characteristics of the game. And the reason is, on one side, you can communicate much better as a designer. What is the game? What is it about? Who would potentially want or need to play it, and why? And on the other side, if you think again about thousands of games that come out every year, it is necessary for the player to see it and understand, okay, either I could play it in one day, or I need 2 weeks and a group of 10 people. So this definitely defines the communication between designer and the player. And I included there 7 things. The first one was important for your audience, and that was the base of the game. So often you would refer to it as a theme or scenario. So where is the game taking place, or what is happening in it? And the question for me was, because the games I designed were for military use, is it fiction or is it reality? Meaning, you could have a valid war game that is taking place in a hypothetical country X that has 20 million people in it. And then the outcome of this game is more limited. So maybe you focus on procedures or on planning, but it doesn't give you any transfer of knowledge or any preparation for deployment. Whereas if you speak about reality-based games, and I have to say preference of participants was 100%, give us the real information, and reality gives you not only the feeling, it gives you relatability, it gives you preparation. So if you speak specifically on military terms, if we have a mission that is going to a given country, they should be able to know what are the languages, what are the main cities, things that you can convey very effortlessly in a game that is based on reality. So if you have that simple distinction at the cover or first page of your description of the game, it is a strong signal of who and why would play it. And point two, definitely you could have guessed it from our conversation, it was level of complexity. And starting from simple, so if you want to say poker games, games, coming to the most complex, and here you have some notorious games that you could play over weeks, or as my colleague says, we played till 2 o'clock in the night and we didn't even finish the round, kind of games. And again, in my view, it should be explained why they are so long. What does it give you to play it over 2 weeks? Because there are reasons to have extended games. But I think if you are teaching or you are playing a game, you also want to know how long it takes. So before you start, I need to have 2 hours to finalize, or half an hour, or 2 weeks. But that is a very valid information. Then I speak about difficulty level. And that difficulty is, I would say, a percentage of people that can win in general population. So you have games that would not pose a challenge to you, but they are very enjoyable. Those are simple games. You also have games that almost nobody wins, and yet that is the point of the game. So you might know that, for example, Monopoly was rejected for publishing because you played it for hours and it never concluded. So you could not see the winner very early. But it is a valid question of what would be the difficulty level to win it. Because if somebody is a starting person in a given topic, they might want to go directly for the difficult games. Then I also mapped the randomness level. And this is especially important if you think about developing skills. So randomness has a place in it, but it should be maybe simulating stock market prices. It should not be taking over your decisions. So I should not roll a dice instead of making my investment plan. So this is where randomness is a question of how much do I determine, how much is given to me by the system. And again, different topics have different possibilities. Time to play, quite important for groups. Number of players, can it be played solo or with 20? And I also included interactivity level. And this was specifically because this was a requirement for all games I have ever designed, because they are complementary either to lectures or to courses or to curriculum for academia. Then we are looking into need for interaction. And that's why it is good to also map it for your potential players, that certainly they will be able to interact throughout the game. And I know there is a second question. I don't know if there is time for it, Philippe.
Yes, you have time. Yes.
Okay, great. I know that you have asked about other uses of wargaming, and I might actually give back the question to you, because I know you have been using war games for management training. And I also have been, in my view, pushing the limits of traditional war games, because as I said, you have very valid tactical questions, but most of them are already modeled. So I always looked at, I would say, fringe scenarios, those that were not yet covered by existing war games. And recently, because I am working within the Hague University, we are looking at wargaming as a method that could be used for different topics. And I designed, for example, a card game that teaches industrial safety by showing different kinds of signs. So everybody that goes into industrial safety will have to be able to name them and say where they should be placed, either for transportation of dangerous chemicals or simply in a factory setting to safeguard the personnel. So you would say this is not a traditional wargaming topic. However, the method is very applicable, and I actually struggle to ever see the limits of wargaming application to other topics. Oh, and there is a question about the name of this card game. I must say it is in its prototyping stage, so it does not have yet a fixed name, but I wanted to name it Signed, Sealed, Delivered, because signs would be signed. If it is already printed, I will post about it on Twitter. So I am happy to share that design as well with other colleagues. And I have a question from Daisy that I will jump into. Could I explain what is called interaction in a game? Oh, that is, I think, a PhD worthy question, but I will do my best to sum up what is, in my view, interaction. So if we speak about board games, normally we would share either the board in the middle of the table, or we would have player boards in front of us. And there is a question when you are preparing your action, first, do you take into account what other people are doing? So I would say this is a passive interaction because maybe there is competition on resources or about space. So this interaction is in the background, but as you say, you would not speak to somebody about it, or you do not need to negotiate it. Whether there could be games, for example, that require 3 people to make an action. And then we would have to be very interactive to find out who will join me to a given point. And there are different formats that support interaction, and there are formats that are more individual. And again, there are arguments for both. In my view, interaction is when I not only have to look at my individual game, but have to either take into account other players, that is passive, or actively I have to work with or against them to achieve my goal. And then I see active interaction towards a goal. Great. I see as well a lot of comments, and I see that we might connect on Twitter after the conference. Perfect.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Are there any other questions? No. So thank you very much, Natalia, for sharing your knowledge about war games and wargaming. Maybe we could now switch to Sarah Lefebvre from the website Ludogogy. Sarah, are you okay?
Mute myself. I need to unmute myself and start my video.
So yeah, we are you, but we can see you.
You can't see me. Just 1 second. I've got a bad feeling that another application might be using my camera. Just let me. There's always technical problems, isn't there? What it is that I have. I'm using a. Let me see if I can get this sorted. Oh, it's always the same. I'm using an auto cue, and it's using my camera. I've just switched it off, but it doesn't seem to be making an awful lot of difference.
That's not a problem, Sarah. Are you very fine? Do you have a presentation to share?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, I'm just going to be talking. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to shut down the teleprompter and start it up again. Oh, no, maybe not. Oh.
Maybe I could share your website? If you agree?
Yeah, so let me just try and get the camera sorted out.
Okay.
I won't be a second.
No problem.
Okay.
During this time, for all participants, Twitch account is still alive, available. Sorry, because I had a little tech problem technique, and I had a blue screen on my subcomputer. So Twitch is available. Okay, we can see your website.
You can see, yes, the website of Sarah, Ludogogy.
Yes, and I'm pleased to say that both Philippe and Natalia have both written for Ludogogy, so you can go there and see articles that they've written. Are we any better with the camera? We're not, are we? Oh dear. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's not a problem. No problem.
Ah,
oh,
there we go.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. It's working.
Welcome.
Typical computer thing. I switched it off and switched it back on again, and now it works.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And let's go.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. So, yeah. So good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for being here with me this morning. I'm really honoured to have been asked to be in the roster of speakers today. And I hope you find some value in the talk this morning about my experience of creating and running Ludogogy, my online games-based learning magazine. So I'm going to start with a little bit about me and how I ended up as the editor of this magazine. I've been an avid games player since I was tiny. And I remember even as a small child being so fascinated with the way that games worked that I would find new rules and improvements, much to the frustration of my family. I've been in corporate learning for longer than I care to remember, and I've always created playful activities to support my learning, support my teaching. And for the last 15 years or so, I can say that I've been a games-based learning professional, as what happened is the playful aspects of what I was doing grew and became more complex until they became the learning offering themselves. And I've also been involved in gamification since the term first emerged, really. I do find it quite problematic. I don't know how many of you share that, that feeling with me. It's just because there are so many different definitions of what gamification means, but I think the more important part of that feeling of discomfort is the kind of bad reputation that gamification got when it first started for being quite manipulative and exploitative, and I don't think it's ever really lost that. But I think we're kind of stuck with it for the moment because people do at least know what you're talking about when you talk about gamification. But hopefully in time somebody will come up with a better term. So that's really me. And the way that Ludogogy came about is that some time ago, I started a games-based learning business back in 2013. And shortly after I did that, partly because one of my other passions, apart from games, is writing, I bought the domain ludogogy.co.uk with the intention of starting a games-based learning magazine. And every year in January, I got a bill from my internet service provider for another year of ludogogy.co.uk, and I still hadn't done anything with it. And I used to sit there with the guilt for a little while going, oh, I'm so useless. I'm not getting on with it. And last year, just before COVID hit, it was the 7th time that this had happened. And I went, that's it. I'm going to do something. So I decided I was going to do it in a hurry. I tend to do that when I make my mind up. So I wrote to everybody I knew on LinkedIn who had anything to do with games-based learning or gamification, and asked them if they would be interested in writing an article for the first issue. And about 70% of people responded positively. I was overwhelmed with the really positive response and how much people wanted to talk about what they were doing in games-based learning and gamification. So a mere 23 days later, after writing that letter to all of these people on LinkedIn, the first issue went out. And that was from a standing start. That was all I'd had at the beginning of that was the domain name. I had no hosting, I had no website. I learned an awful lot about WordPress. I learned an awful lot about integrating themes and getting plugins to work with them, and even sort of doing a little bit of coding in the loop. But I think that kind of speed of getting stuff done, although it had taken 7 years as well, if you think about it, owes quite a lot to a playful outlook. Although it took me a long time to get going, when I made my mind up, I just went, right, let's go ahead, let's do it, without thinking that it would fail, or maybe thinking that it might fail, but really not being afraid of that. And I think that's one of the things that we can take from play, and it's the way that we approach play, and it's one of the big advantages of using play in a learning setting. So what is Ludogogy? So Ludogogy is a bi-monthly games-based learning magazine, and also looks at gamification and gameful design in general. It used to be monthly, but I think my initial experience of getting so many people to write articles, it seemed like it was going to be very easy, and it probably gave me a bit of a false impression of what it was going to be like getting people to write articles on an ongoing basis. Each issue has a theme. For example, the current issue, which came out yesterday, is themed changes, and that looks at how games can be used to bring about changes in behavior, changes in culture, but also how it can help us to deal with change, and indeed how design teams have dealt with change that's been brought about or been thrust upon us by COVID. As well as being a magazine, I think that Ludogogy is also an attitude or a set of values, certainly definitely an ongoing kind of idea that as well as looking at games-based learning in general, there's a definite interest in games-based learning in sort of for good applications. And there are a number of kind of values or themes that run through the magazine, regardless of what the theme for a specific issue is. The first one is the seriousness of play. So we have fun. I have fun with the writers and the readers, but we never doubt for a minute that the play is the work, and that it will help us to achieve lots of things. It will help us to achieve what we want in our work as well as in our leisure time. The second one is that we are really only just scratching the surface of what can be achieved with games-based learning and gamification. And I think this is kind of alluded to. There's many of the same themes in my talk, I think, as were in Natalia's talk, about the idea that we shouldn't have to keep explaining ourselves, explaining what games-based learning and gamification is good for, or explaining that it is good at all. I was really inspired when I started my games-based learning business, Games for Good, by Jane McGonigal. And I truly believe what she says when she says that she thinks that games can change the world. And we're seeing it all the time, in every day, in new ways. Gameful designs being used to tackle really big, wicked problems. And many of the articles which are written for Ludogogy look at games-based learning as a tool for social change or tackling big issues like the climate crisis. But I think the value that comes across in Ludogogy that's really the most important one to me is that the current way in which we look at games-based learning is the wrong way up. I've worked for a number of organisations, which is why I've ended up working for myself, because of the frustrations I've dealt with there. I've quite often been the single games-based learning expert. But the way that a lot of these organizations look at games-based learning is in a very simplistic way. They look at it as something that is there to make learning more engaging or fun, which is fine. It does make it more engaging and fun, but it also upsets me for a number of ways. The idea is that intrinsically learning is boring and you need to make it more fun by, I don't know, putting in cartoon characters or rolling a dice now and again. If you've created boring learning, the chances are that any gamification or games that you tack onto it to make it more interesting are also going to be boring. But also what it does is it disregards the value of play as a pedagogy within itself. It's just a trick to make people do their learning, if you like. To me, it all works the other way up. Learning is fun, and the reason that a lot of games are fun is because you get the chance to learn and grow by playing them. So if people think that games need to be added to learning to make them fun, they really are looking at that the wrong way round. Play is the ultimate learner-centered experience, but learning is also an experience of fun if you do it properly. So that's my little rant over with, my particular hobby horse. So what does Ludogogy offer readers and authors? There are a lot of websites which look at games, games-based learning and gamification. And there are even other magazine sites and journals. So am I just adding another site to a crowded marketplace? What's the need for it? Well, first of all, Ludogogy is definitely not a journal. There are now quite a lot of journals and other publications and courses which do deal with games and play in quite an academic way. And I really welcome that. I'm really pleased about that, because games and games-based learning need this rigor and this evidence base in order to move into their rightful place, which is right, in my opinion, right at the center of teaching and learning. And also gameful thinking and gameful design needs to take its place alongside other kinds of thinking, like systems thinking or design thinking, because it's these kinds of ways of looking at the world which will help us to get to the root of these really big, serious, wicked problems that we're currently facing. But Ludogogy is most definitely not a journal, it's a magazine. And it's designed for a general readership, but also for people, it's designed to be very accessible from the point of view of the authors as well. So it acknowledges that it's okay to come from a different approach than the academic approach, that you can come from the approach of a practitioner or even a consumer of games and games-based learning. It also acknowledges that the format of what you have to say, or even to a certain extent the quality of your writing, you don't have to be a very, very experienced writer, because all of that is less important than the idea or question that you want to put forward. It's an ideas-based publication, and this was something that was quite a challenge initially to get across to some of the authors. We're not a trade publication, so we don't publish a lot of news about what people in the industry are doing or the newest games they've put out. We don't publish articles which are really adverts for someone's product. Writers can, of course, talk about their work. That's perfectly fine, but it's an ideas-based magazine, so we want to hear about the process of creating your game or the theory that was behind the creation of the game. We don't want to have a lot of testimonials about your customers and, you know, how much they got out of it. And for some of the writers, this was a really hard concept to get across initially, because quite a few people were used to writing for trade magazines. And they couldn't really see the value in contributing unless they were able to advertise. So I tried to explain this by saying that if they advertise one product, here's my game and here's what so-and-so HSBC or Shell Oil said about it, then it's only really of any value to you if the person reading it is also a potential customer for that particular product that you're trying to advertise. But if instead you talk about your ideas and you talk about your process and you talk about what underpins what you do, then you have a broader appeal. Clients can see the kind of person you are, the kind of expertise that you have, and they can see whether or not you're the kind of person they might want to work with. And potential collaborators can get inspired and come up with ideas of how you might work together. So in other words, rather than thinking of an article as an advert, I try to encourage authors to think of it as an opportunity to establish themselves as an authority on what they're talking about. We also run a lot of articles which are practical how-tos, how you used a specific theory or a game mechanic to achieve a specific outcome or experience. They might also be articles about ideas that people are just incubating, that they just want to try out. And one of the advantages, of course, of the magazine, the authors and the readers basically being the same kind of people, is that if you want to try out an idea, that these are just the kind of people, games-based learning professionals and practitioners, they're just the kind of people you want to bounce your ideas off. And with regard to the sort of accessibility aspect of it, the fact it's not a journal, the fact it is a magazine, one specific piece of feedback I often get from contributors is that they find it really, really useful to have an inclusive platform to try out writing and ideas without having to necessarily keep within boundaries that they would need in order to get their article accepted by a journal or another kind of publication. So many of them have actually used it as an opportunity to practice writing, and off the back of writing articles for Ludogogy, they've launched their own blogs or started writing regularly for other platforms as well. And the inclusive policy that we have gives them that freedom. So, and I think a lot of what I'm about to say next has a lot in common with what Natalia was saying earlier about us having to justify ourselves all the time and explain over and over again the field we work in. What am I trying to achieve with Ludogogy? Well, the magazine itself was only ever intended to be a first step, and much like starting out with the magazine, the move towards a community platform has been a lot slower than I would have liked, but it is definitely on the cards. And I think there are a number of things that will be facilitated by moving to a more community-based platform and having more features that allow people to be more discursive in their interaction with Ludogogy. The first one is, as I say, a little bit about what Natalia was talking about earlier, is the attitude towards games-based learning, particularly in the area I work with, the attitude from potential customers or clients. So, as I say, my background's in corporate learning, and play and games are a really, really hard sell in that field of learning. And I hear this from a lot of the contributors to Ludogogy as well. Nearly every time I mention to someone that I work in games-based learning, their first assumption is that I work with children. And I then have to go, no, I work with CEOs, and I work with, bank employees and people like that. I have to say that because what I used to say is, no, I work with adults. And even to a lot of people, the cognitive dissonance is so great at that point, once they've discovered that you're not, making spelling games for children, that they used to say things like, oh, so that I presume that's adults with learning problems then. It's like, no. So it's the implication is that, of course, that proper adults, you know, professionals, people in sort of professional positions with all their cognitive skills intact, couldn't possibly benefit through games, because what they do is work, and work is serious, and games can't possibly be serious. This is changing gradually, but it is still quite a big issue in corporate learning. And even those who have embraced the idea of games for learning, they still see it as a way, as I was talking about earlier, of creating engagement, so that it doesn't go much beyond that for them. It's sort of like, well, learning's hard work. People don't want to do learning. So your games are there to just to make it a little bit more fun and get people involved. So it's just like it's a veneer that keeps learners on task, not as they don't accept it as a pedagogically sound evidence-based approach to the actual learning itself. And I think as games-based learning professionals, we have a responsibility to address these misconceptions. And I think creating a more community base to what we do at Ludogogy will give us, getting together will give us the sort of basis in order to do that. There are also a couple of sort of groups of people that I've always really wanted to engage with Ludogogy and talk to with Ludogogy. And the first is learning professionals who want to know about games. So there are lots of very, very well trained and very experienced learning professionals who have not yet had the opportunity to incorporate games and play into their practice. And one of the sets of people I want to address with this is Ludogogy wants to be able to provide information, inspiration, and accessible steps and connections to help these people realise the potential of play in their work. And I think that links back a lot to the first point. The more we have learning professionals who realise the value of play in their practice, the more respectable games-based learning will become. There's also the other set of people that I'd really like to engage with are games developers and players who might need learning expertise. So there are plenty of people working in games design and creation and other related creative fields who could benefit and, more importantly, create value for their clients and others if they knew more about learning theory and practice. And it would allow them to incorporate skills from fields like behavioural economics, psychology, and so on into their work. One of the aims specifically of the community aspects of Ludogogy is to promote cross-disciplinary ideation and collaboration to fully explore the potential of games in learning and in human flourishing generally. So, although I'm saying I want to create a community, one of the things that's actually emerged from Ludogogy, even just as a magazine, is a community has, to a certain extent, emerged from it. And over the first year and a bit now, so Ludogogy first came out mid-February 2020. So since that time, I've made dozens and dozens of really, really interesting connections, and so have many of the other people who've been involved in contributing or reading the magazine. So out of that has grown over that year and a bit quite a few really interesting projects out of the magazine and some other ventures as well. But the main platform on which this was happening, so that the interaction, if you like, was not happening in the magazine because there was very little infrastructure to do that. So most of that was happening on LinkedIn. And this really sort of alerted me to the idea that it was probably time to get going on developing some kind of community platform for Ludogogy. So the sorts of things that have happened as a result of the magazine being in place and the connections that have come out of it. So over 2020, there were a group of Ludogoggers who got together to create a climate change game. There was also a group that got together looking at a game about white privilege and racial bias. That's kind of a little bit in a hiatus at the moment, but we will be getting back to that when people have finished some other projects. projects. And there's also been numerous Zoom meetings where we've got together to do play testing, prototyping, and just general brainstorming, helping each other out with our ideas and so on. And my own new project, Speculative Optimism, which is a playfully based creative writing project incorporating futurism and co-creation to imagine better futures. We're going to write a book which is all about optimistic visions of the future. That wouldn't have happened either without input from contributors to Ludogogy. There's been a number of events. So I end up organising quite a lot of events which just would not have happened without the contacts that I've made through Ludogogy. I convened a panel on using games to tackle wicked problems such as the climate crisis. And at the end of last year, the first 11 months of Ludogogy culminated in December with TEDx Wallingford, which was an online event, which was part of TEDx Countdown, which was a global initiative to accelerate and champion solutions to the climate crisis. But the majority of speakers who got involved in that were Ludogogy writers or readers. In terms of creating a community or starting a community or starting to get a group of people together, I would really recommend the magazine format. I think there's two aspects of it that have been particularly successful. It's the fact that it's a magazine rather than just a blog. So it's issues based, so it comes out at a specific time, which makes it a kind of a bit of an event. But also the idea of incorporating the work of other contributors rather than starting your own blog, which mainly will focus on your own work. It's one that I would highly recommend. It's the interchange of ideas, the connections that are made. It's just a really, really nice way of surfacing all these different ideas, and also it kind of pushes everybody towards greater creativity. But we need to move on to the next steps. Ludogogy has definitely now outgrown being a magazine, just being a magazine, and we need to find other ways to express the ideas that have emerged from it over the last year and a bit. As I said, I've learned an awful lot about WordPress, and I've been totally amazed at the potential it has with plugins and so on, for being able to produce some really, really interesting sort of web-based applications. But I'm feeling now that we've kind of I've reached the edges of what I can do. It might just be my technical expertise, but it feels like I've reached the edges of what I can do with that. So I need to look towards different solutions. One of the things that I really want to put in place, and it's something that I've been trying to find a technical solution to for quite some time, is a projects and ideas marketplace. And I want that to be somewhere where games-based learning professionals and other creatives with an interest in games can come together and share and work on ideas commercially, or just to learn and just for the fun of it. The main sticking block for this has been my lack of time, and also the search for a suitable, easy-ish to use and implement platform. And to be absolutely honest, the need to find some way to fund the expansion, because at the moment Ludogogy is a labour of love, but it can't go on like that forever. That's not sustainable. The other thing that I think is really missing, we've learned a lot from each other, but one of the things that hasn't really happened as a result of Ludogogy, and which I think needs a different platform from the magazine, is the opportunity to play together. Considering that we all work within the fields of games and play, we need those opportunities to play together and all the inspiration that will bring for us. I've always been fascinated with the idea of the salon, and although this might seem quite a lofty ambition or even a bit pretentious, I dearly love the Ludogogy community to be a space where people from many fields, and not just games-based learning or games or anything that seems directly related to that, can come together. They wouldn't otherwise meet anywhere else, and they can come together and bring their expertise and worldviews, so that ideas that would not otherwise be generated can be played with in that space. So I'm hoping that Ludogogy has a playful future, and I think bringing actual play and gamification to the platform itself needs to be something that happens. I need to practice what I preach. Like a lot of people last year under lockdown conditions, I undertook quite a lot of learning. And one of the really useful courses that I went on was CIGE's excellent behavioural design masterclass. I don't know if anybody here went on that, but I can highly recommend it if he runs it again. It was very full on. There was a lot of work involved, and as my project for the learning, I designed a gamified platform for the Ludogogy community, which is a splendid thing, a splendid piece of design. The only issue being is that it's my pie in the sky design. It would probably take months to implement with a full-time development team, and it would probably cost tens of thousands of pounds. So it's probably not going to happen in the short term. But back in reality, I do realise that one of the things that, as I said, is missing from Ludogogy at the moment is playfulness. And I definitely need to start practicing what I preach. So the new Ludogogy community platform has a focus on bringing games-based learning practitioners not just to work, but most importantly to play. I think this is where we'll learn the most and where the best inspiration will come from. And this is one of the themes that constantly comes up in conversation with other games-based learning professionals, is that we have a lack of time and opportunity to play. And quite apart from anything else, this is clearly not good enough. If we are going around telling other people that play is proper work, then we need to be able to give ourselves permission to play, and not only do that when we've got all the other aspects of our work out of the way. So the magazine was an excellent start, and I'm really proud of what I've achieved with it, but I need to move more to a focus of a sort of mutually supportive community, with the publication of the magazine just being one of many events that will happen, along with things like mastermind groups, play sessions, and down the line, game jams, and maybe even a conference. And I think another important future ambition for Ludogogy is that I need to remember that the people who are contributing to Ludogogy, and many of the people that are reading Ludogogy, they are in the business of games-based learning. So in other words, they're trying to do this commercially. So I think another thing that needs to happen to Ludogogy is we need to move beyond just being a platform where we're talking to each other, to being a platform which allows us to reach and have conversations with potential clients as well. This has happened to a certain extent through the magazine. I, for example, have come across a couple of commercial projects as a result of editing the magazine, and I know that some of the contributors, their work in the magazine has been noticed, and they've taken on projects because of it. But it's not, it needs to be formalized, because I want to create a community which is of value to people who are in business, in the business of games-based learning and gamification, and not just something that it's interesting to read about. And I think, again, going back to what Natalia was saying, raising the profile of games-based learning is also something that is going to be really important in the future. Being able to articulate clearly its value as a pedagogy and not simply a trick to make learning more palatable to reluctant learners. Sadly, I think this is still what a lot of potential customers think of when they hear the words games for learning. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the increase in academic interest in ludology and related fields of games and learning is welcome. But as I mentioned before, Ludogogy is based in practice, and it seeks to provide tools to practitioners. So being able to help practitioners clearly articulate the value of games-based learning. So I've made a start on some aspects of the community. I've got plans drawn up for a project marketplace, And I have a year's worth of planning for monthly learning themes and activities. That's all planned and ready to go. The choice of platform and formats is proving more problematic. So if anybody here has any suggestions about suitable platforms for running a games-based learning community, I would gratefully receive those. Because it's proving quite difficult at the moment to find something that can support a growing community and at the same time facilitate collaborative working, research and so on, and playing, obviously. So at the moment, I'm just taking those baby steps, doing something every day in the total confidence that as long as I'm moving in the right direction, eventually I will achieve what I want from it. And I hope that I'll be able to see many of you here today in the near future as you find value, I hope, in what Ludogogy offers, and come and join us in our journey from being a magazine to a community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for this presentation and for all that you do to promote game-based learning. The Ludogogy website is extremely rich. I am completely addicted. As for Natalia, I'll start the question. I have two, Sarah. Okay. Firstly, how do you decide on the themes of the issues? Is it possible to suggest topics to you? For example, can we suggest a special issue on our conference?
Absolutely.
Thanks, Philippe.
I think maybe a special issue just for your conference might be a little bit greedy, but certainly, yeah. So quite a lot of them come from me, but yes, I absolutely would like to receive suggestions for themes. I do. The next theme, actually, which is debriefing and feedback, was suggested by a reader. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Secondly, can you tell us whether you plan to develop maybe the scientific dimension of your journal with, for example, external reviewers for the articles?
Yes, absolutely. I can do that, but as I say, at the moment, Ludogogy is, I would say, definitely not a journal. It's a magazine, but one of the things that I want to sort of move into with the community is to allow people to carry out research together. And that aspect of it, although it might not be published in Ludogogy itself, because I want to keep that as a magazine for practitioners, yes, they're definitely looking at sort of the academic rigor from that point of view, if we were looking to facilitate people doing research together. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any other questions?
Me, I have, but maybe yes. Other people have questions. Sarah, I have two questions to me too. Firstly, it was hard to you to create a community, and moreover, Ludogogy helped you a lot to create this community. And in this way, Ludogogy as a Discord server or not?
Yes, potentially Discord. That's one of the solutions I've looked at. I've been looking at Mighty Networks because one of the things that I find quite challenging with sort of projects that I've been involved in is that situation where you have multiple platforms to get something going. So I mean, I've been on projects where we've got a Trello board, and we've got a Slack group, and we've got X, Y, Z, and you've got 4 or 5 different platforms. So my ideal situation is that I could find a platform where everything could work together. I think that might be a fantasy, though. I think I'm actually going to have to sort of bite the bullet and go, it's a suite of different things working together. But yeah, as I say, I tried Mighty Networks. I've been using Mighty Networks for my other project, Speculative Optimism. And it does have real strengths as a community platform, but I will be honest, it has not been entirely successful from the point of view of running a book writing project. So yeah, I think I need to Unlike the start of Ludogogy, I need to go, right, I'm just going to get on with this. I'm not going to take 7 years. I'm going to make a decision and get on with it. And done is better than perfect. Because I don't think I'm going to find that perfect platform.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, do you have the chat?
I do. I'm just
Okay.
scrolling down now.
You have a
Yeah.
lot of questions since the beginning, so
Ah, right. Let me scroll up then.
yeah, you can read if you want.
Yeah. Okay.
Or you prefer we read with Philippe to you the question?
Yes, Damien asked the question about boring.
Yeah.
There are a lot of responses, but I ask to you, is learning intrinsically boring, or is it just the common feeling of people?
I think it's a common feeling of people. To me, as I said, I think it's the way that people look at games and learning. It's the wrong way up. Learning is intrinsically fun. It's one of the core drives, and it's why a lot of games are fun, because as you play, you learn new strategies, you learn how to approach the game so that you can win, and so on and so forth. So learning is not boring at all, but I do think a lot of corporate learning is very boring because it isn't learning, it's teaching. It's something which is done to people, and then they go, oh, nobody's signing up for our leadership program. So you come along, you make an interesting game, and everybody will have fun and they'll all want to do it. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. It really doesn't work like that. And I will tell you a story. This is hysterical. So I won't mention the company I used to work for, but we were attending a conference along with one of our major clients, and I was tasked with making a game for the evening. And I was told I got to make a fun and engaging game for the evening, but we didn't want it to distract people from what they were doing, which would be networking. So it's sort of like, okay, so you want it to be engaging, but you don't want it to distract people in any way. So in other words, you want it to be engaging, but you don't want it to engage people. But they also didn't realize that I was going, well, I could create a game that facilitates the networking. Really? Can you do that? So it's literally that separation. A game is something that is different and separate and on top, and networking is work. So they can't mix together. And that is a lot of people's attitude. But the idea that you can create something that's engaging but not distracting also just made me laugh so much.
Thank you.
And I've forgotten what the original question was now.
Okay, it seems there are not other questions.
Okay. Cool.
So a huge thank you to you, to Emmanuel, Natalia, and Sarah for opening the conference. We meet again at 2 p.m. With the first session of papers. The theme will be role-playing game in training. The Zoom session remains active. Please feel free to exchange during the break. Enjoy your meal, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.